now a 5-star luxury hotel.
Ano na, hindi rin ako restaurant, floating restaurant.
The golden age of the 17th century was a stellar time for Amsterdam. From politics and the economy to arts and science, everything flourished. And the city was now the most important trade center in Europe. There are many reasons for Amsterdam's astounding success. It had the largest and most progressive shipbuilding industry in Europe. Dutch traders sailed farther than anyone else to newly discovered lands in the Far East and to North and South America. They organized into companies like the Dutch East Indian Company and the Dutch West Indian Company. And the profits from trading staples like grain and exotics such as spices, porcelain, precious stones, and textiles were enormous.
We are now in the Oosterdock, or the East Harbour, and on the left side of the boat you see a large green building. This is NEMO, or New Metropolis. It's a museum for science and technology for children and young adults. The building was designed by the famous Italian architect Renzo Piano, and the outside is covered with copper, and that's giving the building that green color. And also on the left side, another large building that was built in 1656 in just 9 months. It has been in use as a warehouse for the United East India Company. It's also been in use for the Navy. And nowadays you find in this building the Maritime Museum. When you buy a ticket for the museum, you can also visit the ship.
There's no one. It's so funny.
We're now traveling along what was once the outer defense wall of the city. The original city boundary was to the right, to the left, salt marsh and the North Sea. The red brick tower coming up ahead of us is the medieval Montelbaanstorm. An ideal lookout for sighting potential invaders, it was built to protect the city's shipyards, wharves, and warehouses from attack. From here, Dutch soldiers armed with longbows, crossbows, and early firearms called arquebuses kept watch over the wide expanses below.
The tower's white spire and clocks were added a century later. They were designed by Hendrik de Keyser, an architect whose work can be seen around Amsterdam, and who you're certain to hear more about on this cruise. The clocks couldn't keep time, and the tower's bells rang out randomly, so locals gave it the nickname Silly Jack.
Not long after the spire and clocks were added, the tower began to list to one side. With some effort, it was pulled to rights. You might be wondering why so many buildings in the city tip to one side or the other. The ground in Amsterdam, a mix of peat, sand, and soil, is very soft. Because of this, buildings were generally designed to be as light as possible. None were very tall, and they often had lots of windows. For stability, they were built on a bed of wooden piles driven as deep as 15 meters, that's 45 feet, into the ground. But if these piles were exposed to the air, they began to rot, and the buildings they supported sank and shifted. Today, water levels in and around the city are carefully controlled to minimize rotting. When new piles are needed, they're made of concrete. Still, you'll see many a house with a sideways tilt.
The Mantel van Storen was a place where sailors gathered before setting out to sea. The journeys were long and difficult, and not everyone returned. Legend has it that the women who loved them also came here to say goodbye, perhaps forever.
We are now on the Oude-Schans, or Outer Trench Canal. During the 16th century, it served as a defense canal. All the city's canals served one or more of these functions, as a transportation route, a line of defense, or a way to manage water levels. The Oude-Schans, because of its size and location, did all of these. Because it was one of the only canals wide enough for large ships to sail, and because of its proximity to the harbor, the Oude-Schans became a convenient place to unload cargo. We're about to pass through one of the city's old locks. The small, tippy black building was once the lockmaster's house. It's now a pub and cafe full of 17th century charm, stone floors, wooden benches, and exposed ceiling beams. Its outdoor patio is a great place for watching boats on the canal.
Yeah, you can see the black cafe to the left ahead of us. And as you can see, it's leaning quite a lot. And behind the black cafe, you can see the Rembrandt house. It's the second house from the corner with the green shutters in front of the windows.
We're now approaching the Waterloopplein. It's located adjacent to the City Hall, the large red brick building. The original Waterloopplein was an island built in the 17th century to create a space for Jewish settlers. At the time, it was called Vloeienberg, for Flooding Island. Over time, the name morphed into Vlooienburg, for Flea Island, and the bustling market held here was called the Flea Market.
For centuries, Jewish traders sold their wares here. The market continues to operate and is now known as the largest flea market in the Netherlands.
Oke, kita nemu yuk.
Look at the group of very crooked houses. We affectionately refer to them as the dancing houses because they look like they're tilting and swaying to some happy tune. These buildings get their crazy tilts from the wooden piles that are supposed to be holding them up. The more the piles rock, the wilder the houses dance. The outward lean that you see on so many buildings is another story. It has nothing to do with rotting piles. The facades, or the faces of buildings, were intentionally built this way. In fact, a 16th century law put limits on how far a building could lean forward, lest it topple down.
And on the right side of the boat, you can see an old defense tower. This is the Ming Tower. And next to the tower is the flower market.
Ay, maing.
In the year 1672, 1674, the French painter Claude Monet was sitting on that side of the Amstel River, making a beautiful painting of the Groenburg Wall. You can see the Groenburg Wall on the left side. Canal with the bridge, and at the end you see the tower of the church, the southern church.
Parang kayak may dog.
We're now on the Amstel River. The round, white-faced building you see next to the City Hall is the Muziek Theater, or Music Theater. It's home to the Dutch opera, known for its daring productions, the Holland Sinfonia, and the world-renowned Dutch National Ballet. The Dutch may be known for their tolerant attitudes, but they also have strong opinions. This piece of architecture was met with heavy protests that have since burned down. In fact, that's how it got its name, Stopera. It's derived from the movement against the construction, Stop the Opera.
Ano ba lang kayo? Sanay pa lang kayo ng mga ano.
The Magere Brug, otherwise referred to as the famous Skitty Bridge, stretches all the way across the Amstel River. Of Amsterdam's 1,500 or so bridges, this is the most famous. It dates back to the 17th century and was likely a narrow footbridge. Since then, it's been reconstructed more than once and grown wider with age. Legend has it that whoever you kiss while passing under the bridge will be your true love for life.
Now the bad news is we're not going there. But the good news is it's also possible on the disc bridge, so take your chance.
Oh.
We're now on Herengracht, or the Gentleman's Canal. It was part of a careful plan to expand the city. In the early 17th century, a time of tremendous physical and economic growth, 3 new canals were laid out in concentric rings. The Herengracht was innermost.
Merchants, investors, politicians built elegant mansions on the Herengracht. The Keizersgracht was solidly middle class, while the Prinsengracht had a more industrial atmosphere. Of the 3 canals, the Prinsengracht was the only one that connected directly to the harbor, and its low sides were designed for loading and unloading cargo.
And so, the farther you lived from the city center, the lower your social class. Today, this would no longer hold true. All of the city center is expensive. Get your camera ready. We're about to pass by one of the most photographed views in Amsterdam. The 7 arched bridges over years.
sunod.
While nobles ruled elsewhere in Europe, here in Amsterdam, it was the self-made merchants. During the 17th century, they were earning as much as 700,000 euros a month. That's more than the average rich person earns today. The wealthiest of the wealthy lived here, on the Herrengracht.
Today, almost all of these mansions are used for business, as people can no longer afford to live in them. An exception is the city's mayor, whose official residence is at number 502 Herrengracht. Look for the gray facade with white columns just before the bridge.
The golden age of the 17th century was a stellar time for Amsterdam. From politics and the economy to arts and science, everything flourished. And the city was now the most important trade center in Europe. There are many reasons for Amsterdam's astounding success. It had the largest and most progressive shipbuilding industry in Europe. Dutch traders sailed farther than anyone else to newly discovered lands in the Far East and to North and South America. They organized into companies like the Dutch East Indian Company and the Dutch West Indian Company. And the profits from trading staples like grain and exotics, such as spices, porcelain, precious stones, and textiles, were enormous.
Now let's slip back in time to the 17th century. Imagine a colorful scene. Gentlemen in fine clothing on the street, speaking different languages. Elegantly outfitted ladies stepping down into horse-pulled carriages. The clatter of wheels on cobblestones. And dare we mention it? An unpleasant waft of sewage coming from the canal.
Building restrictions limited houses to a width of no more than 6 meters, or 18 feet. But those who could afford got around this by buying 2 adjacent lots and building a double house. Some of these double homes even had 2 different facades. There was no restriction on depth, and with 20 to 40 rooms, a large private garden, and a coach house behind that, mansions often stretched all the way over to the next street.
We're now at the so-called Golden Bend of the Herrengracht, the most lavish section of all. Imagine going into one of these sumptuous homes. On the first floor, an elegant entrance hall with marble floors, high ceilings, and chandeliers. Mirrors were strategically positioned to create an illusion of even more space. And single-lot houses would often have a fake door on the side of the entryway to make them appear bigger than they were.
Rooms were richly decorated with painted wallpaper, oil paintings, fine sculptures, and exotics such as Turkish rugs and Persian silks. In the second half of the 17th century, Parisian furniture, Louis XVI style, was very much in vogue.
As a gentleman, you might join your host in a deep-colored smoking room. A lady, your hostess would receive you in a light blue salon or tea room. Here, you'd sip imported tea from China while looking out over a beautifully manicured garden. No one ever sat in the gardens. It had ruined their fashionable white skin. Musical concerts and grand parties were common, and each house had many rooms dedicated to entertaining. For a first-hand glimpse of life inside an opulent canal house, there are 2 wonderful museums in the area.
The Hilving Lopenhaus and the Wild Holthausen.
It was cheaper to build twin houses. These 2 little black houses here on the right side are the twin brothers. side. And on the left corner you can see the Twin Sisters. And now coming up on the right side of the boat, the Beuling Sloot, or Beuling Ditch. And this is one of the smallest canals in Amsterdam, here on the right side.
As we pass by these richly decorated canal houses, there's so much to notice. So many flourishes and details, ornate door cases, sculptures, and of course the decorative gables at the roofline.
There are several different types of gables, and over the decades, they've gone in and out of fashion. See if you can spot them all. The oldest type is the spout gable. This basic triangular shape is seen only on warehouses. The 17th century step gable looks just as you'd expect, a series of steps. The neck gable, with its straight up and down sides and scrollwork decorations, came a bit later, followed by the bell gable, which has a more rounded, bell-like shape. By the 18th century, the cornice, a flat-top gable, was most popular.
There's one thing that all gables have in common: the hoisting beam. Staircases were so narrow and steep that furniture and goods were lifted to the upper floors via the hoisting beam, along with a good strong rope, a hook, and a pulley. Goods were generally stored up high to keep them dry during the city's frequent floods. There's a strong tradition of moving things this way, as even newly constructed houses have narrow stairways and are still equipped with hoisting beams.
Until the 18th century, house numbers didn't exist in Amsterdam. Instead, people relied on gable stones. These carved and sometimes colorfully painted stones were set into a house's facade, often above the door. Pictures made reference to the occupant's religion, profession, or their family crest. For example, a butcher might have a picture of a lamb, a dentist might have a tooth, a miller, a windmill. Illiteracy was high, but such symbols were easy to understand.
As we ride along the canals, keep an eye out for gable stones. There are more than 650 throughout the city. As you find them, you can challenge yourself by guessing what they might mean.
You may have noticed that most of the city's houses are made of brick. That's because bricks could be made locally. They were very porous compared to bricks of today, and had to be oiled, tarred, or painted to protect them against the weather. You'll only see stone on the facades of the wealthiest of homes, because it had to be imported, costing much more than brick.
For the shoppers among us, to the west or left of here is a unique shopping district called Negenstraatjes, or 9 Little Streets. Each street is a block long and full of quirky boutiques and specialty shops. It's a relaxing and fun place to explore.
pagar esa renta. No, por lo menos el único que
Coming up on our left, at numbers 170 and 172, is a beautiful 17th century red brick mansion with white sandstone accents. This is the Bartolotti House, designed by Hendrik Keizer, Amsterdam's most famous architect of the time. It was built for a very successful beer brewer named Willem van de Hoffel. He changed his name to Bartolotti to honor an Italian relative who had left a sizable inheritance. The facade has two inscribed panels that reflect Bartolotti's and many other 17th century businessmen's values. They read, through talents and diligence, and through piousness and virtue.
Homes like Bartolotti's were designed to showcase their owners' enormous riches, and yet, this was a time when Calvinistic views predominated. Calvinism is a form of Christianity that emphasizes strict living and industriousness. The rich found themselves in conflict. Their religion required them to be humble, yet with so much wealth, how could they not show it off? Often they ended up quietly trying to outdo each other. Looking for something else authentically Amsterdam? Pay a visit to the Jordaan, a lively and well-known neighborhood not far from here, just west of the Prinsengracht. In the early 17th century, this neighborhood sprang up outside the city walls to house the growing population of poor laborers and immigrants who served the city's welfare. Through the 19th century, the Jordaan continued to be a district for the industrial working class, known for its outspoken inhabitants, romantic flavor, and community spirit. Today, it's become one of Amsterdam's most popular residential districts. Crafts and trade people still live here, along with students and artists, and recently, an influx of well-to-do young professionals.
The Jordaan has many charms: a bustling marketplace, little cafes and pubs, hidden courtyards, and art galleries. If you have time, wander through narrow cobblestone alleys and experience the lifestyle of true Amsterdammers today.
One more thing to note about the residents here. If so much as a single ray of sunshine is out, expect to see locals dragging their chairs out onto the street to soak it up.
Now that there are house numbers, look for Keizersgracht number 123, also known as the House with the Heads. This beautiful Amsterdam Renaissance-style building of brick and sandstone is decorated with 6 beautifully sculpted heads. They're said to represent the Greek gods Apollo, Mars, Ceres, Minerva, Bacchus, and Diana. But legend has it that they symbolize the 6 thieves who once tried to break into the house. They were beheaded by a brave servant.
We are now on the Keizersgracht or the Emperor's Canal. This canal was named after Emperor Maximilian I of Austria. And here on the right side you can see the house with it. It was also designed by Hendrik de Keizer.
Where's the number? Did you see it?
Today, the city's many canals are still used for transportation and for managing water levels. And they also have a new function, as a place to live. Amsterdam always seems to be short on housing, and during a real crunch in the 1960s and 70s, houseboats appeared as cheap places to live. The city now has around 2,500 of them. Some are old converted sailing vessels. Others are simply homes set on floating pads. As for cheap, not anymore. Houseboats are now connected to gas, water, electricity, and municipal sewage. And owners have to pay taxes, just like anyone else.
On the left side you can see the Greenland warehouses. These warehouses has been used for the storage of whale oil and other whale products. And nowadays you find in these buildings apartments.
We are now approaching Brouwersgracht, or the Brewers Canal. This canal was part of the city's 17th century expansion. It connects the 3 main canals, the Herengracht, the Keizersgracht, and the Prinsengracht, and used to form the northwest border of the city. With its arched bridges, many houseboats, and beautiful architecture, it's now one of the most picturesque waterways in the city.
But that wasn't always the case. Many of the industries banned from residential areas ended up here. That included the smelly ones, like leather and whale oil processing. And of course, beer brewing, which gave the Brewers Canal its name. Because water quality was so poor, people turned to beer as a safer, healthier drink. Only the rich could afford wine, which was imported, but everyone drank beer.
Many of the buildings you see are old workshops and factories, or warehouses. Merchants originally stored goods in their houses, but as trade increased, more and more warehouses were built. See if you can spot some. Look for triangular spout gates and windows with wooden shutters. The shutters help keep goods dry and dry.
Back in the 17th century, when Brouwersgracht was at the edge of the city, ships sailing for the Dutch East Indian Trading Company would come here to unload silks and spices from the Far East. And for a time, the Dutch West Indian Trading Company had an office along this canal. This powerful company traded in sugar, tobacco, tropical wood, furs and ivory, and had a monopoly on trade with the West Indies. Its ships also transported slaves from Africa to the Americas. An interesting side note, even though some of Amsterdam's merchants traded in slaves, they were never employed in Dutch households.
Aside from the East Indian and West Indian trading companies, the Noordse or Hollandse Vaart was a third powerful company. It specialized in whaling, processing the meat as well as the whale oil, which in turn was used for lamp oil, soap, and paint, all very profitable commodities.
Today, the harbor bustle has moved elsewhere. Most of these historic buildings have been converted into trendy apartments. The atmosphere is much quieter and more pleasant. And luckily, the canal water is much cleaner than it used to be. It's now filled with a number of creatures, including fish and crabs. Several types of water birds are also happy to make these waters their home.